what I'm really passionate about is having conversations about the future, about policy, about electing people who share our values, about reimagining society so it works for all people. I really like these broad, semi-utopian, visionary conversations more than anything else, and everything else um, sort of bogs it down a little bit, but it's worth it because at the end of the day, we're doing stuff that's important.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. I'm your host, Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers who are doing incredible things in their respective fields about their story and how they became the person they are today. When it came to the name of the podcast, Oh My Curry Goodness, I broke it down into two parts. The first part is the oh my goodness part, where when we hear stories that are interesting, inspiring, shocking in any way, we say oh my goodness. Now, curry is more because is added because it's my favorite food. As someone who loves South Asian, one of our favorite dishes is curry. I didn't want to name the podcast Oh My Chicken Curry Goodness because that sounded weird. So I just wanted to name it Oh My Curry Goodness. However, I hope that by the end of each episode, you as listeners join me in taking valuable lessons from each guest as we continue to write our own story. Because storytelling is a great way to connect with people in a unique way, and it gives you a sense of hope and belief that regardless of who you are or where you come from or what your age is, that you are capable of doing incredible things. And I hope that the guests that are part of this podcast are able to play a small part in your journey. Now, my guest this week is Sam Weinberg, who is the founder and executive director of Path to Progress, the only progressive think tank run by and for Generation Z. It's always great to see young people, I hate to use the word young people, but let's just say it, young people or Gen Zers involved in the political process. And seeing people like Sam try to educate people and raise awareness when it comes to political issues is really cool to see. So, Sam Weinberg, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And I have to say, one of the things that and I'm sure many of my guests in the past, if there's one thing that I want to really have at some point, is that courage or just that ability to overcome fear in any way. And what I mean by that is, especially when it comes to getting involved in the political field, political space, that can be a very scary field to be in because you're talking to people with different viewpoints and sometimes it can get ugly. And you're someone that's willing to fight for people who you feel like can help the country move forward and whatever that may be. But I want to take it back in terms of I want to focus on you for the time being. I think a lot of activists or many people in general, there's always this one there's you can always look back at certain experiences where you're like because of this experience, I'm the person that I am today. And I want to talk about overcoming fear because I feel like I said, when it comes to politics, you can easily be in this like scare. It could be a scary field to be in. So tell me a time where you used to be afraid of something that you're no longer scared of anymore, and it could be anything. It could be simple as something like spiders, or just anything in general. Tell me a time where you used to be scared of something and you no longer are, and how often you use that experience when tackling challenges that you're facing today.
That's a great question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind actually is media appearances like this one. I first did, I know this isn't live, but I first did a live TV appearance in 2020. I think it was just about 3.5 years ago. It was on BBC World News. And when I was invited on, just for a short, really short, like 5 or 6 minute segment, it was pretty daunting, but also quite exciting. And I think there's something inherently scary about newness, about things that are new, that are unexplored and unexperienced. And when I think about things in my life that have been scary or fearful or a bit overwhelming, it's things mostly that are new. So like anything, I think it gets easier with time. I think making sure that you're, reasonably prepared for things that you're um, nervous about or scared of is reasonable. For instance, like on that um, BBC interview, I made sure I had, bullet points in front of me that I could glance down at if I needed to. I didn't really know their questions in advance, so I just had, sort of like general statements ready in the back of my head. Um, here, even talking with you, when you sent me like an outline of our discussion, I made a couple bullet points that I'm looking at right now. So it's like I think it makes it a lot easier to be prepared in terms of overcoming fears of things. I think, what you said about um, things happening that make people who they are, that also really resonated with me. Um, there are lots of more more typical fears I think that I've experienced throughout my life. Like I used to when I was young, I used to have a fear of heights, a fear of flying. And again, it's the same thing, right? You overcome it with experience. The more I flew, the more it was fine. The more tall buildings I was in, the more it was, okay. Um, it gets easier with time.
Yeah, that's like everything you said is so true. Everything that comes with time. And it's funny because one of the things I do want to talk about is what Sam was like before Path to Progress and then what Sam was like after the creation of Path to Progress. But here's the thing. If you're to, I know we're just meeting for the first time virtually, but if you met me in person and you told me we're going to go see spiders for an hour, I would run away as fast as possible because I'm afraid of spiders.
Yeah.
However, if there is one thing that I used to be scared of that I think I've done a good job of overcoming is that fear of talking to people. Because what's funny is that I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure you have friends, same way I have friends. However, it's one of those things where when you meet people for the first time, it can be very scary. It can be nerve-wracking because you've never met this person, you don't know who this person is. But then one thing that's kind of helped me overcome that fear is knowing that the friends that you have were once strangers, but because you've been able to spend time with them and because of the experience, like you mentioned, it definitely then it gives you the sense of belief that, oh, you know what, I am able to talk to these people. And why I say that with this podcast, it's helped me in terms of that is because I'm meeting new people every day, whether it's yourself or anyone in the country around the world. So I really do like how you talked about it's okay to be scared. It's okay to have those feelings of nervousness, tension. However, yes, things do come with time. And it's not something that I think there's a specific deadline. It's one of those things where, and I don't know, maybe, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it's like, and I know you're not a mental health activist, but it's like everyone's journey with overcoming certain fears takes time. It's not like there's a specific deadline. Like, Sam, if you're exposing yourself to media, it's not like by this day you have to overcome your fear. It's more of like a personal journey that we can't really like force on, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I think overcoming those sorts of issues is not really something you can quantify. Um, but you can tell if you're making progress or not. And I like the example you used about, like difficult conversations maybe. Where like obviously you're having those difficult conversations because you host a podcast. Um, so no, I completely agree.
Now, you are the executive director and co-founder of Path to Progress. But one of my favorite advertisements to sometimes watch, as someone who's a big Wheel of Fortune fan, is that sometimes there will be ads where they'll show a product and then there's a before using the product and after using the product. So I want to ask you because you seem like the type of person that's very outgoing, social. You're not the type of person that likes to give one-word answers, which many times throughout this podcast I've said that that's something that bothers me a lot. As someone who goes to Ohio State, you meet people that just give you one word answers and you're like, wow, I really just wasted my time talking to this person. So tell me a bit about what Sam was like before Path to Progress, like in terms of personality, characteristics, traits, and then what skills or things have you picked up since creating this organization?
I mean, I think I'm fundamentally the same person as I was before. There are definitely skills and opportunities and things like that I've picked up. But um I don't think that founding and helping run this organization has changed me fundamentally. I will say that I think I've become better at teamwork, at getting feedback from other people, at working cohesively. I've also become a little bit more careful um, and thoughtful about what I say and do, having a more or less public platform, being a little bit more conscious of the effects that things I say and do can have when they're amplified. Um, not that's not to say that I was like thoughtless or careless prior, but having a national platform definitely impacts how you think about your words and actions. Um, when you have to anticipate the worst. You have to assume that people are going to think the worst of what you say. And that's incredibly stressful and daunting, but it's also in some ways helpful in terms of um how I conduct myself. Um, there's there's definitely more to it than that. I I think that Path to Progress has unfortunately taken time away from a lot of the things that I otherwise would like to be doing. I don't work, like exhaustive hours. I work probably like 30 or 40 hours a week, um, which I think is about the range that pretty much everyone should. At Path to Progress, we advocate for a 4-day, 32-hour work week, and I try to stay true to that, and leave myself time for other things that I'm interested in. But yeah, it does, take a toll time-wise. I left college early after just 3 semesters partially because of cost. That was a big barrier, but also um, because I just didn't have time with college classes and Path to Progress work. And so hopefully at some point, I'll go back and continue a formal education. But for the time being, the political and policy advocacy has really taken the foreground.
The college part is really interesting because, like, I mean, I told you this before we started recording. I'm a student at college, and it's really hard to balance the things that you find interest or passion in with schoolwork. And yeah, it can definitely take a toll on somebody because it's about how much you care and how much work you're trying to put in because you are trying to raise awareness about a particular issue. And I will agree with one of the things I that you said when it came to some of the things that maybe never necessarily did not have, but more so you were more conscientious of, if that's the right way of saying it, is the importance of leading. And I think that's really important because even though I host a podcast, I do have people around me that help me with the podcast. And it's taught me how to be patient. It's taught me to be more flexible in a way. And I don't know if that's necessarily leading or teamwork, but I think that even though you're the founder or the host of a podcast, if you have people helping you, it's important to not just be, I don't want to say like, you don't have to be like the boss in the sense. You want to make sure that you're flexible because you are part of something really good. And the last thing you want to do is say something or do something that negatively impacts you. I want to ask you, because it's funny, I think I I asked someone by the name of I had Mariana Pecora who worked for
Yeah,
Voters of Tomorrow, and one of
she's
the
great.
things we talked about was, and maybe this is going off topic, but I think the idea of not understanding your own intentions is really important. So you're saying something because you really believe in it. However, not everyone else thinks the same way. So you might have a belief, but someone might interpret you as like evil or, why is this person believing this because that's not right or I don't agree with this person. Are you okay? And this kind of goes into the idea of having difficult conversations with different people. Are you at peace knowing that when you are speaking about political issues and knowing that you're just trying to give your best version, your honest opinion on things, even though not everyone has the correct interpretation or not everyone understands your personal intention, are you at peace in knowing that sometimes you can be seen as, and I'm not saying it more as like an accusation kind of thing, but more like you have this idea, but you're at peace knowing that not everyone understands the why behind why you believe certain things, if that makes sense.
That's a great question. I'm not at peace with that at all. I think I guess in some ways I am, in some ways I'm not. I'm not at peace with the idea that people are unreachable or that there are conversations that can't be had. I think that any conversation can be had, and any conversation that can be had should be had within reason. But yes, at the same time, I do understand and I am at peace with the fact that not everyone is going to be able to engage with everything all of the time. Um, that's just sort of an unfortunate reality that we experience in a lot of different situations, political and not. People are busy. People have different interests, different passions, different topics that they want to discuss, that they don't want to discuss. So overall, if people perceive one thing one way, they're going to. That doesn't mean that, that I have to be happy about it.
Yeah, let's talk about now the idea of having difficult conversations. And I want to break it down into two parts. One more personally, and then one more from a political spectrum. So let's look at you personally. What either it could be one or maybe multiple, it's up to you personally. What were some difficult conversations you had growing up or even now that at the time you were like, why are we having this conversation? This doesn't make sense. But you're able to look back and go, I hated having these conversations, but looking back, I'm glad that I had these conversations because it's helped me think differently, or it's kind of shaped me into, again, like that person that we see today.
The first thing that comes to mind, I was 7 years old, and my parents got divorced at the same time that our townhouse was foreclosed during the Great Recession. And so there were all these conversations happening sort of in tandem about my parents losing their marriage and our family losing our house. Um, both of which at the time, as a 7 year old, I was, not fully cognizant of the reasons or ramifications for either. Um, but in hindsight, it's it's definitely good that those are things that were talked about openly because they are, big and impactful and probably to a degree greater than I can recognize, have shaped who I am now.
Wow. Firstly, I'm gonna say sorry for the things that you experienced, and it's
I'm
weird.
totally fine, but thank you.
It,
Yeah.
it's weird because I actually asked this to someone, and it kind of, and again, this is why, even though I've talked about in the past how I didn't grow up with that many challenges. I was very fortunate to be honest, the only thing I really worried about was grades. Because as someone who's South Asian, oh, that's a nightmare. Comparing people's grades to certain people. And so I used to worry about that. And then now it's like when I meet people like you, it's like, okay, I only see this side because of social media or because of media outlets. But it's nice to be able to see the person and the fact that, yes, there's one side of Sam, but there's also another side of Sam that we probably don't know, but we should because again, it's that human moment. Um, Switching to politics, what was a difficult conversation you had when it came to politics that you may have hated, but you're kind of grateful? And it doesn't matter if that person or group of people agrees with your views or disagree with your views.
Well, first of all, I was growing up very worried about grades as well. So you're definitely not alone there. But I think in terms of politics, I um let's see, in April, I guess it came out publicly in July, but we filmed in April. Um, this Gen Z talk show called POVs, hosted by I think she was on your podcast, Sophie Barron. Um, uh, I was on a panel with me and I think it was three or four other people, one of whom is a staunch conservative, far right Trump supporter. Um, she's now the national spokesperson for uh, Donald Trump's presidential campaign that was just announced the other day. So congratulations to her, I guess. Um, but um, but that was a very difficult conversation. We were talking about, sort of the meanings of patriotism and Americanness. The episode came out right around the 4th of July, and it was a very difficult conversation. I actually haven't watched the episode. I don't know, out of a mix of like self-consciousness and just not really wanting to hear what was said. Um, but I think overall it was an interesting conversation. I don't know how productive it was. I don't think anyone really changed their minds, unfortunately. Um, but regardless of what your goal is in difficult conversations, I think that at the very least, you need to understand where the other person's coming from. And if your goal is merely understanding, then you've got it. If your goal is persuasion, if your goal is discourse, then understanding is maybe just the first step. But those sorts of conversations, I don't necessarily enjoy having them in the moment, but long term, they're good and important and worth having.
For sure. And I think that a lot of people may agree with what you're saying, which is that you may not like them because it can sometimes test you in a sense, because it's like, this is different from how I usually think. But those conversations at some point are needed because it's about how do we find that compromise. Wait, is it compromise? Like find that middle, or the find the things that in common to continue going forward. And I actually know which episode you're talking about because I remember watching that. And these conversations are my favorite as a viewer, but I'm sure as someone who participated in them, it can be challenging because it's really all about learning about a person's perspective. I don't think that if a person disagrees, it's not because they're good or bad. It's because they see things different from how another person sees things. And so I think it's what you said is really interesting. And I love watching these videos just because it's like there's no such thing as a good or bad person. It's just that they see things differently, and it can definitely challenge or it can definitely challenge you. It can definitely test your patience just because it's not something that you're used to. And that's actually, and now when it comes to politics, because you talked about that conservative, a person who's conservative, I think in the country we live in today, it feels like there's a good side and a bad side. It's like Star Wars all of a sudden. It's like one group believes that the Democrats are a good side, one person believes the Republicans are a great side. I'm only using Democrat, Republican, although I know there's more layers to it. And so when you're talking to someone who disagrees with you, and I don't know if you're a Democrat or Republican, I don't want to make any assumptions, but when you're talking to someone who is different from you, how do you, I guess, I think for a lot of us, when we talk to someone who is on a different political spectrum, we confuse likability with respect. So, for example, I know Ben Shapiro is a very controversial figure, but there are people like some of my friends who are Democrat don't like Ben Shapiro, but they respect his his way of communicating and his public speaking skills at times. So, for you, when you're looking at someone who thinks different from you, what do they need? And this is something that I don't think it's just a you thing. I think it's like for a lot of people when they're talking to someone who has a different viewpoint, what do they need that even though you don't like the way they think because it's different, you still earn their respect at the end of the day, knowing that, okay, I don't like what they think, but I respect that this person has this viewpoint and I'm not gonna like bash them just because they think differently.
I appreciate you saying that. I think it has different levels to it there in terms of respect because I think there are some views that are just inherently not respectable. Um, People who delegitimize other people's existences, people who deny reality, I don't think that's respectable. I think we can respect people's rights to have bad views without respecting those bad views themselves, and making that distinction is something that's difficult but necessary. Um, but no, I like what you said about the difference between liking something or someone and respecting something or someone, because I think something that I've really noticed about myself as I've gotten older is being able to differentiate not just between what I like and respect, but between what I like and what I appreciate. I mean, before I left college, I was majoring in or mainly taking classes related to art history, and I'm a big film buff. I like art. I like literature, and I think one of the like aha light bulb moments in my appreciation of all of those things was realizing the differences between what I liked and what I appreciated. Like, for instance, I don't like Marcel Duchamp's art, but I appreciate it. It's groundbreaking, or it was, forward thinking. It, reflected different societal trends and malaise and cynicism and this sort of, oh, fuck it, post World War One attitude. Um, that's just one example. But there's also obviously things that I like and appreciate, but there are also things that I dislike and appreciate, or that I like but don't really appreciate. That, things, I think appreciation is more cerebral, more intentional, and what you like and what you dislike is just sort of based on, you know, not quite preference, but it's more like almost predetermined. It's harder to get your finger on it, on the pulse of it. Um, and and what you like and what you respect. I think that's a similar type of dichotomy there. So I appreciate you bringing that up, definitely.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a difference between liking something and respecting something. Like you might not like someone who has a particular viewpoint on something, but you might appreciate for another trait that they have. Because I'll tell you this, I know there are a lot of people that I may not like their viewpoints, but I'm definitely impressed by their public speaking or debate skills. Because
Mhm.
if someone said, Hamza, you're going to debate with so and so about a particular topic, I am not a great I'm not a great, well, I love speaking in front of people, but I'm not a great debater. And so being able to learn from people who, even though you may not like their viewpoints, it's always nice to be able to go, okay, I really like the way that they do things, at least how they communicate, because debating is a really important skill, especially when it comes to fields like activism or in politics. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to bring all of this together because throughout these difficult conversations, throughout the challenges you've had when it comes to leaving college early to pursue path to progress, and the fact that you are raising awareness about political or about the political field, especially when it comes to young people. Again, it goes back to this idea of like, oh, there's so many things that I can't control. There's a lot of things that can be nerve wracking at times. A lot of people, they're really passionate about something, but there's always this self doubt, this idea of whether I should continue doing this because people are saying this, or maybe you just don't feel like you're doing enough. So, how do you know if you are doing the right thing? Because even though other people may tell you that you're doing good, the only opinion that matters is, or the only thing that matters is yourself and what you say to yourself. And we don't really count ourselves as ourselves because we're too busy experiencing ourselves. Like no one can really see it. Like we can't see ourselves because we're being ourselves kind of way. So throughout your journey getting involved in political activism and with Path to Progress, how do you know if you're doing the right thing, regardless of what other people say?
I think I have to push back on the premise just a little bit, because I do think that there is more that matters than what we say to ourselves. It's definitely important to be self-assured and to personally feel like we're doing the right thing and doing what's true to ourselves. But personally, I also really value the input and feedback of friends and colleagues and acquaintances. Um, I think that the best way to gauge whether actions, both big and small, are right or wrong is to think about whether they align with larger values and to have a strong sense of your larger values. And so you can, determine whether or not your actions are in line with them, which is what I do with my values and actions, or at least what I try to do. But when in doubt, I think that instead of you know pontificating too much or overthinking something, it's also really helpful just to use friends and whoever, people you trust, as a sounding board.
Yeah, now that I think about it, you're right. Yeah, because I think it's great to be able to remind yourself that what you're doing is helpful, but it is also important to have friends and other acquaintances. So you are totally right. I should have noted that. Yeah, that's on me. But I still think, what you said is still true regardless, because there are these people that, yes, there are going to be people that will not like what you do, but it's also important to be able to get that feedback because there are other people that want to see you succeed. But I also think that sometimes, even when there are those difficult days, it's very hard to keep going. So that's kind of what where I was going through, but where I was going with. But nevertheless, I think what you said is really spot on, or is also true. And I should have worded that differently, so I do apologize.
Oh no,
Um,
don't.
before my last two questions that I want to talk about, let's start with my favorite one. So you are very passionate when it comes to political activism. However, just because people are passionate about something, it doesn't mean that their journey is easier. It's just something that's coming from from a sense of I want to do something versus I have to do something. However, when you say I want to do things, there are certain things along the way that you have to do because it's part of the job. As someone who's involved with Path to Progress, raising awareness about the political field when it comes to young people, what are some things that you don't like about the things you're passionate about, but you have to do because it's what it means to be a part of this organization or in the political field?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing for me is that in politics and in like policy spaces, there are a lot of people with really, really strong personalities. And I generally just like I'm totally fine, love people with big, strong personalities. Um, but often in political spaces, there are people who are difficult to deal with, who are too type A, who are a little bit too driven. I think being driven is admirable, but I think there are lots of people in political spheres who view success and advancement as zero sum, as you know, one person gets it and another doesn't, and vice versa. Um, and that can be difficult to deal with sometimes. I think I would say that people's egos and when people put themselves above policy, that can be difficult. Um, a lot of people, maybe everyone is guilty of it to some extent, but it's it's not fun to deal with. I'd also say that just like some of the more nitty-gritty day-to-day things about running a nonprofit are difficult for me. I don't like as much, fundraising. I don't like having to deal with compliance. I don't like having to deal with some of the more like day-to-day maintenance related things. What I'm really passionate about is having conversations about the future, about policy, about electing people who share our values, about reimagining society so it works for all people. I really like these broad, semi-utopian, visionary conversations more than anything else, and everything else sort of bogs it down a little bit, but it's worth it because at the end of the day, we're doing stuff that's important.
I really appreciate you saying the importance of having conversations and also those broad topics just because even though people may think of it as an easy thing, they're really not. And I've seen those videos and I'm sure we all have where when one person talks to someone else, if the moment they have a different viewpoint, regardless of how small or big the issue is, we just don't want to have these conversations. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about is the future, and I want to break it down into two parts. The first part is for yourself because you have expectations, and knowing that the 2024 election, the presidential election is coming up, and then obviously all the other elections, not just with national, but state and local, obviously there's what you're hoping that there's certain candidates that you think can help lead the country or state or local levels. You have your expectations. How are you embracing that future, knowing that there may be candidates that you want that may win their races, and there are candidates that you want them to win but they end up losing? Obviously we can't tell what happens in the future, but how are you embracing that personally?
I mean, personally, I'm working individually and in my capacity at Path to Progress to make sure that we can elect as many young people as possible, as many young progressive people as possible in 2024, while also, you know, electing progressives more broadly than that out of that age range. Um, we're really excited about several Gen Z candidates for both state and federal offices that we've endorsed. Um, Joe Vogel in Maryland's 6th, Cheyenne Hunt in California's 45th. I'm particularly excited about Cheyenne Hunt's candidacy. She's just a fantastic candidate, really policy driven, very innovative, incredibly progressive. Um, and then beyond that, we're also going to be focused on, some key Senate races, the presidential, obviously, depending on how, the primaries go. It seems like Trump is going to be the Republican nominee and he's going to be the person to beat. So we're going to be focused on that for sure.
Path to Progress has a goal of increasing young people's presence in the political field. Obviously, there's
Absolutely.
so many things happening. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, no, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say there's a lot of races that people are keeping an eye on. When it comes to Path to Progress's vision for 2024, knowing that it almost feels like each election or each race is its own battle. Instead of looking at it as a war, it's more like those minute small battles. How would you Path to Progress define success? Because obviously, like you said, there's your expectations. There are people that you're hoping can be elected in their specific positions. Path to Progress obviously has a goal of raising awareness when it comes to young people in politics. What does success look like for Path to Progress in 2024?
We measure success in terms of electoral victories, in terms of youth engagement, but also in terms of the conversations that we have. And those are things that are a little bit more intangible and unquantifiable. One of our goals broadly is to shift the Overton window on what conversations are acceptable and what aren't. So thinking in a really future-oriented way about things like a 4-day work week, things like decriminalization and decarceration, accessible education, sustainable economic growth, sustainable development, addressing the climate crisis. So it can be hard to measure success. Electorally, it's very, very easy. Did you win or lose? Um, but beyond that, even electorally, sometimes it's more difficult because a candidate might not always be running to win. They can be running to elevate certain issues or to help down ballot candidates. And I think, when we measure success, when we talk about success, it's not really one individual tangible item. It's very easy to say, oh, we want to elect so and so. It's more difficult and probably more beneficial long term to say we want to be doing consistent work to elevate conversations around X issue or Y issue or whatever. Um, those are the kinds of goals that we set, and even though they're intangible and a little bit hard to quantify, I think we think that they're worthwhile.
Well, I know that 2024 is still early on, but nevertheless, it's still going to be a very important year, especially in politics. And I'm glad that there are people like you who are trying to raise awareness when it comes to young people and also just getting more young people involved in the political field. Because even though we may be young, that doesn't mean that we don't have a voice. We do have a voice and we're capable of doing incredible things. So, Sam, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for not only just being involved in the political field and giving young people that belief in having a say in politics, but also sharing your story because yes, Path to Progress exists and it's an important organization, but what's even more important is the person behind the organization, such as yourself. So thank you for being able to share your story and your experiences. I wish you the best of luck with Path to Progress and yourself personally, and I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'll add, I'm not the only person behind it. We have a great team, all of whom I should shout out. But thank you. I appreciate it. Great being here.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.